Good afternoon, everyone. This is Meredith Ward with NASPE. Wanted to let you all know we're going to get started a couple minutes after the hour to give everyone an opportunity to sign on to the webinar. So hang tight and we'll start soon. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Meredith Ward with NASPE, and I will be your cruise ship director today via webinar. Thank you for joining. Obviously, workforce is a very important issue to state CIOs, NASPE's members, and to state government in general. So I'm very pleased that we have this webinar for you today. Workforce has been ranked on the CIO top 10 in previous years. It wasn't this past year, but like I said, continues to be a very important issue. So I'm happy today that we have a couple of great folks on board to talk to you about this issue and to answer your questions. And before I introduce our two speakers today, just a reminder that everyone is muted, and if you have questions, you can ask those in the chat box, and we will get to those, and I will ask those of our speakers at the end of the webinar. So, first of all, today joining us is Leslie Scott, and Leslie is the Executive Director of NASPE, which is the National Association of State Personnel Executives, and NASPE represents state government HR directors and their senior staff. Also, we have Gerald Young, who is a Senior Research Associate with the Center for State and Local Government Excellence. And we are happy to have both Leslie and Gerald today, and I will turn it over to them.
Well, great. Thank you very much. This is Gerald, and just wanted to say we appreciate this opportunity to share this information with you. and also to chat with you and hear what your concerns or issues might be regarding workforce. The Center for State and Local Government Excellence has been working in this field and related fields for about 10 years now, and throughout that time we've been working with partner agencies, partner academic researchers and others to try to uncover what the issues are within government generally, not necessarily state government, but state and local government, to see what it is in workforce issues that they need to have resolved in some way, what challenges they're dealing with, and likewise what's new or worth copying really in the way of retirement benefits, health and wellness as well, so that we can really share these good ideas and help other jurisdictions to take advantage of those as well. This particular series goes back to 2009 when NASPE, SLGE, and the International Public Management Association for Human Resources got together and decided that there was really a need for surveying within the field of workforce issues. It first started looking at the impacts of the Great Recession, what that meant for our organizations, and beyond that, then following up each year to see how those trends were changing over time. And this particular survey, the 2018 survey, was released in a report earlier this year. That particular report deals with state and local agencies. The data that we are going to be sharing with you today is just the state slice of that particular survey. And you'll see as we go through the various slides that there have been a number of things that have been improving in the last few years as we've been coming out of the depths of the recession. Employment is getting better, some of the cuts are slowing down, but there are still significant difficulties out there, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more depth. So as you look at recent actions within the employment sphere, one of the interesting dichotomies here is that as we look at the color coding on this particular chart, the yellowish or orange fields tend to be those that reflect some negative action by the employing agency. So it might be layoffs, pay freezes, hiring freezes, furloughs, pay cuts, all of those types of things tend to be done when an organization is in cutback mode. And you'll notice that all of those are toward the lower end of the spectrum. Fewer and fewer jurisdictions are reporting that they are engaging in those activities, whereas the more positive steps of hiring employees, hiring contractors, re-employing those who had perhaps already retired from the staff, all of those activities are increasing. And while you can see the absolute numbers here for 2018, for instance, hiring employees, 87%. If we look at it from previous year's surveys, just in 2015, that figure was 70%. So it's jumped 17% in just 3 years. Likewise, those that were hiring contractors is at 56% here. It had been 50% in 2015. So each one of those has been inching up. And you can see that in the negative trend category, each one of those has been declining. So there was a time, particularly right after the recession hit, that all of those were fairly high, and they are all at this point at 20% or lower as a share of the state agencies that were reporting to this particular question. Now, as we look at what that means in terms of the overall organizations, more organizations are hiring. Fewer organizations are cutting back or not filling positions. Does that mean that we've come out of the recession and all of those impacts are past? No. It's a little bit more pronounced on the state side of this particular set of graphics here. And you can see fairly clearly that up through the 2016 data that we have here, the employment really has not recovered to the peak that it was at before the recession hit. And in fact, most estimates that we've seen are talking about the fact that we have this new normal, that we are not necessarily returning to where we were before. Employment may inch up in various categories, but there are a number of factors going on that together are saying, no, we wouldn't necessarily be adding the same number of positions that we added before. And as a result, we're finding that some of these positions that we do have are becoming harder to fill. We continue to recruit for various positions that are maybe a little bit more the traditional types of positions that state and local governments do hire for. But several of those are having issues, particularly in this economy where the unemployment rate has gone so low in many regions of the country. So you'll see here that, for instance, nursing positions, 42% of the agencies that we surveyed were saying that it is difficult to fill nursing positions. And from an IT perspective, you'll notice that many of the categories on here reflect that it is difficult to fill IT positions. Now, there are two variables that are graphed in this particular figure. The one in blue represents those that are difficult to hire, and the one in orange or yellow is those that are being filled rather on the gig economy. So it might not be that organizations are saying, yes, we've come out of the recession, we're fully in the clear now, let's hire more permanent full-time staff. Instead, they may be saying, well, we know that we have a need for services to be provided, but let's not be too hasty in bringing more permanent staff on board. Let's meet some of those needs on more of a temporary basis. Now, this is not to say that these are positions that would be, let's say, full-time temporary, if there is such a thing. As an example, there are a lot of organizations out there that might hire an attorney on retainer and have that same attorney for 5 or 10 years. We're not talking about things like that. We are talking specifically about arrangements for contractual staff for less than a year. So typically for a project or maybe a few months to carry out a particular task. That's what's being reflected in these gig economy numbers that we're seeing. So you can see those a little bit clearer here. And again, IT is heavily represented among those services that are being filled on a contingency basis. So what does that mean in terms of our organizations and management of those organizations? Well, it does not mean that all of that service is being filled on the gig economy. It's possible that let's say in the web development area here, we see that 9% of organizations say that they are using the gig economy to fill some of those positions. It is just that, some of those positions. It might be that a larger organization might have a very large staff of web developers, and maybe only a fraction of those would be filled via the gig economy. But that also presents challenges in that when you have a mixture of people who are on the permanent staff and those who are working on a contractual basis, you also have differential morale issues and productivity issues, cost of service issues, and possibly issues of the quality of the services that you're maintaining. Likewise, it might be that the responsiveness to the public is different. When we look at the customers that we are serving, if somebody is working as a contingent worker, and I apologize, I have a question that had popped up on what the gig economy is. It is typically identified as contingent workers or workers who are serving in a non-permanent temporary capacity. The most common example that we see these days all around us are the Ubers and Lyfts and other companies that are trying to provide some sort of as needed service. But in many ways, it goes back to the way that, let's say temp agencies have tried to fill gaps for organizations in the past. It might be office workers who are brought in during an extended absence of another employee. It might be within IT, people who are brought in to provide a particular service, whether that was in the old days with Y2K, or more recently with concerns about cybersecurity. Maybe you'd bring in somebody to handle a job for you, and once they've got it up and running and they can hand it off to somebody in-house, then maybe that person or that group goes away. So again, where you have people who are not necessarily a part of the organization, potentially they are not meshing as well with the rest of the staff. And that's something that we are going to continue looking at as we do further iterations of this survey to see what the implications really are and how the organizations have adapted to the fact that they now have these gig workers as part of their overall workforce. In this figure, you see a little bit the change that we've seen over time. The three lines toward the right show some of the other positions. Obviously, several types of positions are becoming more and more difficult to fill. So here we see nursing, engineering, skilled trades. Police is another one that used to be very easy to fill. There would be lines of people submitting their applications and being put on a waiting list to be considered for a policing position. Not so much anymore. In IT, it's been a significant growth over the last several years, so much so that after the 2017 survey, we decided to break things out, and where you see that 40% of organizations were finding IT generally as a hard to fill category in 2015. We've now broken it out to show IT other, network administration, web development, and IT support, represented by the 4 dots that you see toward the right hand of the graph. So all of those are fairly difficult to fill, and I'm sure that you have seen this much more in your own organizations as well. Not all of the news is bad. One of the things that you can see in terms of change year to year is that there are fewer jurisdictions that are saying that they are hiring fewer people than they had in the past. So if you look at the yellow line toward the bottom, it was about 30% of organizations that were seeing declining hiring back in 2012, and that's down now to about 18%. And likewise, more jurisdictions that are hiring more people than they did the year before. Now, that gives you an impression of what's going on in terms of hiring, but one of the big questions in terms of workforce is what you need in your organization and what you need in the people that you do bring on board. And we ask, among other things, about the skills that organizations are seeking, not necessarily positions, but skills. And technology, as you can imagine, with all of the focus on smart services these days, whether that's Internet of Things or sensor arrays or other things that will help to provide services in new ways, technology is a significant demand for all employees. But the first and third items on this list are the ones that were really most interesting to us, and that they reflect really the fundamentals, the education experience that helps for interpersonal relationships with your coworkers or the clients that you're serving, and written communications really being key to those employers, those agencies who are looking to hire. Also looking at how people are integrating staff into their organizations. One of the real buzzwords in the industry has been flexible work practices. We think of the example of the Googles of the world that have very different styles of workplaces. And everybody wonders, well, gee, is that the wave of the future for governments as well? To a certain extent, it has been. But interestingly enough, as much as we see that 64% offer flexible work hours and 62% offer flexible scheduling, one of the more interesting factors here is that these things have been changing and not necessarily in a growth direction. The percentage that say they had no flexible work practices has gone up, and the percentages that say that they are offering flexible work hours or flexible schedules has been going down. We've seen this most since about 2015, 2016, and it's difficult to say whether this is a trend that will continue. It might be that some organizations jumped on the concept, figuring it was the next big thing. But again, looking at how we are going to continue asking these questions and asking the follow-up questions, as we look to our 2019 survey, we're going to be looking at the reasons that some of these changes have been occurring, particularly where it's not in the direction that we would have anticipated. We've talked about hiring, but there are also a lot of changes going on in organizations in terms of departures, and layoffs and negative employment actions we saw at the very beginning are on a decline, but there are significant numbers of employees who are quitting or retiring, and that was something that really slowed down during the heat of the recession. Most of those people who were thinking of retiring may have, excuse me a second, let me get back up to that slide. There we go. Many of those people who were thinking of retiring postponed their retirement. 46% postponed retirement in 2009. We're now down to 20% of those who are retirement eligible who are doing that. So, we had people who were concerned about their financial situation, decided, what, this is not necessarily the time, and we're seeing a little bit more spiking in those numbers who are going out the door, which is all the more challenging when you're looking at not only more retirements, but difficulty in hiring people to take those positions' place. There we go. We're also seeing a number of changes as we focus on benefits. If we think about what was going on with the recession, organizations were cutting back as drastically as they could, not just in the number of FTEs that they had in-house, but in some of the benefits packages that they were offering, whether it was a perception on the part of the managers that we need to economize, or potentially it was a political decision driven by state legislators or by individual fund managers, or on the health side, changes that were coming through with Obamacare and the changes that have been going on with the insurance industry more generally. So lots of changes happening in both of those spheres, and still lots of changes happening on the healthcare side. But if you see on the lower line here, the changes going on in retirement have been declining. That could be because many of those organizations have already made the changes that they anticipated making. There were a number of efforts to raise the awareness level of the pension funding crisis. So potentially organizations figured out what they needed to do, whether that was increasing their fund balance to cover the anticipated costs of their pension benefits, or perhaps it was in sharing the cost of those pension benefits more with the employees. Whatever the case is, fewer and fewer are making those changes as of now. What does that mean for the individual organizations? Well, many of them have made those changes in terms of increasing the contributions that the employees make. Some of them have increased the contributions that the organization makes. And as you see, there's an array of other changes as well. Many cases, that means that the new employees bear the greater brunt of that, whether it's a provision that is grandfathered in for those who are already covered by a retirement plan, or just that maybe the plan is then separated and maybe there's a defined benefit traditional pension for existing employees, and then new employees are shifted to some other form of, let's say, defined contribution or deferred compensation plan. Now, all of that might be looked at in a vacuum as something that, well, okay, we make some changes, we'll wait and see what happens with that. New employees here, you can see that there is, again, a trend significantly changing in terms of those where the number of plans that are changing the employee contribution is going down, presumably, again, with some of those changes already having been put in place. But still, there's been a trend over the past several years that many changes are being made in those retirement plans. And what is the impact of that? Well, we have an issue brief that was just published a couple months ago that we did in cooperation with the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. And it shows that where pension cuts have been made, the agencies are then having difficulty, not necessarily in hiring for those positions. Again, there are some positions that have been difficult to hire for, but when they do hire for those positions, the people that they bring on board are coming in with salaries from their previous employers that are 2.9% lower than for those organizations that did not make pension cuts, basically indicating that the caliber of those employees that you're bringing on board is lower because quite possibly they are finding other opportunities in the private sector and are not opting to go to a public sector job. So if that decision is made to cut back on benefits, again, that might be a logical step from a financial standpoint, but it does have consequences in terms of, again, the caliber of employees that you're able to recruit. So if you do have folks that you are bringing on board, or you have folks that have been on staff for some time, do they understand their retirement benefits? Do they feel that they are prepared for retirement? Those are a couple of questions that we've been attempting to answer. And in terms of being financially prepared for retirement, 40% were indicating that no, they don't believe their employees are financially prepared. And one of the more interesting studies that was done was one in South Dakota, looking at auto enrollment as an option to help employees deal with that. So they have a defined contribution retirement plan that's available to their employees. Rather than just making that program available, they have auto-enrolled every employee, made it possible for agencies to auto-enroll their employees within that plan. So where an agency has opted to do that, they've seen a significant spike, as you can imagine, in the participation in those programs, which again, does not necessarily mandate that each of these employees puts money away in the plan, but once they get in the door, it's a means of helping those employees to save on their own and to benefit from the programs that are available to them. I'm sorry, it looks like the text got lost on this one, but in terms of the pie shapes, you can see here, does your agency offer financial literacy programs? The percentages on this, let me see in my notes here, it's 42% of organizations that do offer financial literacy programs, 40% that do not. This is an area that SLGE has been researching further, and we're trying to get to more of a case study approach to which organizations are offering this type of a benefit, how they are structuring that, and how they are spreading the word to their employees of the types of information that can be at their disposal, so that either they are making better use of their own funds and saving for retirement, or they just have a better handle on all sorts of financial literacy issues, whether that's in identity theft or loan repayment, or any number of financial issues that they might be facing. A couple more issues that we've been looking at are competitiveness within the labor market. And this is represented in two graphs here because there is such a drastic difference between the two. Wages, employers are feeling that they are not very competitive on wages with the private sector market, but they do feel that 70% say that they are competitive on benefits. And why is it that we have such a drastic difference between the two? Well, as we look at the portions of overall compensation, we think of compensation itself, the wage portion of compensation, as typically being lower in the public sector than the private sector. But you can see on this graph, looking at the line that goes across, back in 2006, wages represented 67% of overall compensation. They now represent 63%. And using the same scale but a different axis, the other two variables, health insurance and defined benefit retirement, have both been increasing. So the benefits that an employee gets when they come on board with a public sector agency represent a larger and larger share of the total that they are receiving in compensation. So where that's the case, even if you might be able to pull a higher base salary from a private sector employer, those benefits are a larger and more important share of your overall compensation. So the last two significant issues that we've been polling on have been looking at employee retention and development, and in what issues agencies see as they look ahead. And in retention and development, the biggest issues happen to be on succession planning and working with people as they're potentially going out the door, the exit interviews that we see at the very top. Quite a range of issues that organizations are facing. And some of these are divided into subcategories as well. So we see, for instance, wellness programs that are informational listed toward the top, but we also have wellness programs a little bit further down, such as reimbursements for gymnasium memberships or smoking cessation programs or on-site fitness facilities. Again, a wide range of programs that people are seeing as being beneficial for their organizations, but really in terms of what's troubling them in some way, what the challenges are that they are facing, the biggest ones are around recruitment, compensation, workload, and turnover. As far as employee development and leadership development, there's quite a range of organizations that are finding new and creative ways of doing that. And I think the approach that we're hearing about and we're trying to focus on a little bit more is really the concept that leadership development starts day one. It is not something that happens only when somebody has announced that, hey, I'm retiring, then you start to think about succession planning. These organizations are looking at succession planning as they bring somebody into the organization. How can we help them to develop as a staff member? How can we expose them to additional opportunities in-house? And how can we develop their skills over the course of a career so that when they are ready to take on those new challenges, we have that stable bench that we can draw upon. So the last item that I'm going to share from my perspective is that time series graph. Again, looking at those forward-looking trends. And the recruitment and retention is the one that's really continuing to be the highest concern. Organizations are having significant issues in that area and are looking for whatever assistance they can find in getting and keeping those employees once they've got them. So with that, let me see here. Whoop. Leslie, do you have the control of the screen at this point?
I am checking just a moment. Yes,
There we go.
I do. There we go. And thank you, Gerald. I just got back from our NASPE's annual conference last week, and I can tell you the conversation still very much mirrored what the results were on this survey and the challenges that states are facing. And obviously compensation is a little bit better, particularly wage. And hiring continues to be relatively steady, but all the states are facing a lot of, a good deal of retirements and the institutional knowledge that's going out the door, particularly as we're getting ready to get a large new round of governors, and a lot of folks leaving at the end of a governor's term. So states are thinking through all of that. Millennials continue to be a challenge, recruitment and retention of millennials. So states are looking at various strategies for that. One of the things that NASPE is really focusing on is communicating the importance of the workforce to the governor and legislative leaders, so they understand how these HR and workforce issues really impact them and the platforms that they campaigned on, the goals that they want to accomplish during their term. So trying to put the workforce issues and strategies into the bigger picture. So one of the first things that I want to talk about today is aligning those leadership goals and workforce strategies with the citizens, the residents of the state who elected these officials. They want better customer service, support and continuation of programs. They want high quality service, and the branding and perception of state government. Obviously, governors and leaders of the state want to be associated with great service. And in fact, a McKinsey and Company study, recent study, asked how U.S. state governments can improve customer service, and it said speed, simplicity, and efficiency. Satisfaction is often lower for more essential services. So really, those frontline employees, working with them and recruiting and retaining top quality employees there. It says citizens are less satisfied with government services than private sector services. And most citizens prefer to interact with government online, which probably is of interest to IT folks as well, since their skills are probably more needed. So the HR workforce impact in that is obviously the class and comp programs, making sure that we are paying employees and retaining them. And while there's been some movement there needs to be more. Wage is currently an issue, and all of the states have mentioned that. There's an aging workforce, as we all know, many retirements, and the institutional knowledge is leaving. And employee engagement programs, that's obviously very important to have employees at all levels engaged in the work they are doing. And, that's very different than the employee satisfaction, where they may be satisfied with the paycheck they're getting every 2 weeks, but they're not engaged. And so that's one of the things that is important. Secondly, is just understanding the financial constraints and the fiscal constraints that states are under. Obviously, it's you want to be transparent and efficient, the media scrutiny, and simply improving efficiency and doing more with less. The classification and compensation programs and the benefits, all of which Gerald referred to, there are significant issues. Healthcare healthcare for employees continues to be high cost, and states are looking for more efficiencies there. And also being more strategic about the classification and compensation programs. You may need more than one pay schedule. You need to have a lot of flexibility within those, and having an understanding of how to implement that is important. Of course, economic development, and that that ties into a lot of the strategic initiatives in the state, bringing in new businesses and developing the private sector workforce. But you have to have investments in public safety, education, and health and human services, and to do that. And so, as we were talking, it used to be difficult, or it used to be easy to hire police and public safety. That's more of a challenge these days. And so, thinking about the workforce strategies that would attract and retain those. Obviously, nursing and health and human services, we've known for a long time that those have been a challenge for states to recruit and retain. Many times it's the compensation. Many times it's just the work that they do, and making sure you're hiring employees that understand what they're taking on and what they're getting into, and doing a better job in the recruitment part of the work cycle. So, creating top talent strategies, it's not easy, it's not overnight, but there are things that states can do to at least begin that process, and having a clear and relevant organizational mission and vision, and letting employees know how they fit into that mission and vision. For example, the state of Tennessee, they have SMART goals for all of their employees, and they understand how their mission and vision, or how their job relates to the agency's mission and vision, and their performance appraisals and pay are tied into that. Obviously, conducting an analysis of the human capital needed to accomplish the mission, taking a look at the work that is going to need to be done in the future, and seeing what types of skill sets are needed, and identifying those talent gaps and implementing those plans, that succession planning and workforce planning that we've talked about for years. Obviously, talking about the return on investment for the investment you make in employees and their compensation systems and their leadership and development training, and really tying it back to the accomplishments of the agency and the state in general to continue to get those recruitment and retention efforts and the leadership and the compensation funded. Merit systems. A lot of times merit systems have a negative connotation, but I think there are some opportunities to promote the positive sides of merit systems, sometimes the stability of merit systems, but it's also okay to push for some reforms within those systems, adding some flexibilities, and eliminating some of the constraints that sometimes merit systems have. Recruiting beyond the typical applicant pool, just not the post and pray approach to jobs. Most states have full-time recruiters. Sometimes agencies have their own recruiters, depending how the state is set up. And looking for skill sets, not necessarily the specific traditional background for a group, for an employee and for jobs. For example, there's one state we talked about at our annual conference. They look for people with customer service backgrounds to work in their health benefits agency, because these folks are very good at addressing issues and helping members with their challenges, and they have found that they can teach them the health benefits side, but they can't necessarily teach them the customer service skills. So that has been a success for that state. Obviously, the applicant experience, the online experience, the time to fill, the response rate, and all the way to onboarding. Clearly, states have seen a need to speed up the process as well as make it more efficient. And having a good onboarding within the agency, making sure agency heads are, inviting new folks into the agency, and videos and online experiences. Of course, selling state government, branding state government, and making it an employer of choice, and wanting them to think about state government. Of course, pay, developing flexible pay mechanisms, and providing tools for managers to apply with consistency, and funding pay for performance. Obviously, establishing mutual value between employee and employer, really having a good understanding and changing the culture of an agency to so that the employee provides value to the employer or to the agency, to the state, but that the state is also giving something back and investing in the employee, emphasizing state service as a career and linking employees to the overall agency mission, and giving them the opportunity to move around from agency to agency. Sometimes that can be, some agencies see that as a challenge, but for career, it's developing these employees, and maybe eventually they'll come back. Continuous learning, building a philosophy of continuous learning and development for these employees, really investing in them. That is where we see a lot of opportunity for the millennials in particular. There, read a recent study that 78% of millennials thought that professional development, continuous learning were very important parts of the job.
Okay.
So these, you're back to Gerald.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to wrap up and mention that we do have a couple of additional resources that are available online. One specifically on succession planning and strategies that organizations are using to boost that approach, and likewise resources on staff sharing. This particular report is written from a public health perspective, but it can really apply in any organization where you're looking at sharing staffing resources that may be located in another neighboring jurisdiction, or between states and counties, or however that might be structured. And I'm not going to bother going into the other projects that we have in the hopper or on the planning stages right now, because I do want to make sure we have some time for questions. You have our contact information here. But I would like to, again, open that for questions. If you can use the chat box and enter those questions for us, we'll respond to those. I see one that was already entered, asking about states that are looking at technology not just as kind of a siloed issue, but throughout their organizations, and how they can successfully educate their elected leaders and other managers to see that there's some change that needs to take place, and perhaps a little bit more focus on technology. I'll let Leslie respond to that as well, but for my part, I'll say that I think that many organizations are changing the way that they're looking at technology. As I mentioned, that is one of the top two issues that were identified in terms of skills that were needed within an organization. And it's not just within the IT staff, it's within transportation and healthcare, and service delivery with CRM applications. It's in cybersecurity in terms of elections and utility operations. Policing, I've been working on a different study that's looking at policing issues and recruiting. And so many police operations are focused these days not on the typical walk or drive a beat or a patrol, but on the social media engagement that they need to be involved with, the data analytics to look at what has been happening and what might be happening in the future. And all of that is presupposing a certain amount of data literacy. So I think that's front and center in so many people's attention these days. Leslie?
Yeah, I would echo that, and just simply add that the jobs are changing, and so HR sees its role particularly as helping agencies think through that. And having an understanding of what those new jobs may look like. And most of the time they do involve technology. And I don't know that anyone else, I don't know that we have been completely successful at this point, but I think it is part of the strategy that you have to talk about when you talk about the future workforce and succession planning and gap analysis.
Gerald and Leslie, thanks so much. One of the things that I've heard that we hear a lot when we talk about workforce is, are we kind of back to normal from 10 years ago and really the recession? But I think something that we really are focusing on or need to focus on is maybe it's a new normal. And so, really liked the information that you all shared today. One thing specifically that state CIOs really talk about is the need for job title reclassification. We know that California recently underwent a big job title reclassification endeavor, if you will. And you all mentioned this a little bit, but, in the state government sphere, any additional research on job classification or titles and the impact that might have on state government?
This is Leslie. I would just add that's been identified as critical. Lots of states are looking at their classification systems and do understand that some of those job titles are just frankly, just not relevant anymore, and people don't realize what they are applying for because those job titles just aren't used in the private sector. So a lot of states are really trying to clean up their classification systems. It depends on how much flexibility they have, whether they may or may not be unionized. But I can tell you that was a big topic of discussion, particularly if there are some relatively small states who have way too many job classifications. And so I think that will be a focus as we move forward because it ties in with the flexibility and compensation that will be critical to retaining a workforce.
Right. And it's also critical to the flexibility of succession planning too, that if you want to enable an employee to work across various departments or groups within your organization, you can't have a job classification that is so narrow that anything that they might be doing is outside of that classification.
Exactly, and that kind of comes into a follow-up question about job descriptions. I'm not sure that one is talked about as much as just trying to get people in the door with the job title or classification. Any additional insider that you have on job descriptions?
No particular insight on it other than, as I say, that was something that has been a focus of the organizations that we've been surveying, that they do want to find that correct alignment of the classifications and position descriptions with the needs of their organizations.
I agree. I can't really add much to that other than there is an understanding that if states haven't done that, and obviously it depends a lot on how the state is structured, but they need to take a look at that. That's critical.
One thing, Leslie, that especially you talked about is this concept of branding state government. And I like that a lot because I'm not sure that that's something that 20 or 30 years ago that state government would really think about, is that kind of concept of branding. And I think that's a huge part of changing the culture of state government. So I really like that, and the other thing that we see from CIOs, they are trying to rebrand state government and what it means to work for a CIO's office, and they're really trying anything, as we see when salary can't really compete with private sector. They're promoting non-salary benefits, as you all said, and doing whatever they need to do, and promoting the call to public service. And one thing that another thing that I think CIOs are really looking at is this concept of artificial intelligence, robotic processes, automation, things like that. We know that's already being used in state government, And it has replaced some function of state workers, but are state workers really threatened? Any additional perspective on that?
We can't really see in the level of data that we're collecting right now the specific impacts that automation may have on that. It's certainly one of the buzzwords that comes up as we talk about what those looking ahead issues are. But that's something that we're going to see a lot more in specific studies of specific positions and how those have changed. The Center for State and Local Government Excellence has done some work looking at employment projection data, and there are some of those fields that are projected, looking 10 years out, for instance, to decline in overall numbers. Some of that, again, may be attributable to changes in technology. Some of it may just be due to outsourcing of services entirely, and perhaps something that used to be done by a state or a local agency is now done by a private company, and therefore you don't have those employees in-house in the agency anymore. That could be something as simple as auto mechanics, if you're maintaining more of that work via the contract with some local provider.
And I think we're seeing just a move to more. There obviously is automation, and states are utilizing technology more, and there is a shift to more strategic types of roles. But the reality is there still need to be the frontline folks taking care of and supporting the frontline folks. Whether it's social workers or nurses, there's still a huge need.
So I think we can safely assume that state workers will never completely be replaced by robots. And I certainly hope the same for my job, but who knows? When we maybe in a couple years, we'll look back at data and see where we are. Thank you so much, Leslie and Gerald. Really enjoyed all the data and the trends that you all presented, and I thought we had some really good participation there in the end and questions from our members. So just so everyone knows, the webinar recording will be available on the NASCIO community, and I believe also on the NASCIO website, and also the Center for State and Local Government Excellence website as well. You can definitely get the slides. You have the presenter's contact information, or feel free to contact me, mward@nascio.org, if we can answer any questions. Thank you guys so much, and we will go ahead and end the webinar. Take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.